Hello, my name is Alex Head, and I'm with AWS, and I'm here today to talk to you about cost allocation best practices. First, we're going to have a quick intro into my background, and then we're going to walk through defining, implementing, and scaling cost allocation in your organization. So I run a team called Optics, which stands for Optimization Intelligence for Cloud Systems. And we work with some of AWS's largest customers, connecting the dots for the IT, business, and finance sides of a company. So mainly saving these customers money and helping them become more efficient. Working hands-on with these customers has given my team and myself some very unique insights into pain points that customers have around cost allocation. And today I'm going to walk through what I've seen be really helpful when reassessing cost allocation in a lot of these customers. First thing, most important step, is defining an allocation structure. When you have this conversation, you want to think, why? Why am I allocating cost? And right here I've highlighted 5 main pillars of what you will benefit from when you do that cost allocation. First, visibility. You're giving your teams, yourself, your leadership visibility into what is driving cost and what is driving your overall line. Accountability. If you give visibility, it allows you to hold your teams accountable for their AWS footprint. Motivation. Tracking progress and improving efficiency. So the more you can see a team is becoming more efficient, the more you can motivate them by reporting that and saying good job or pointing out where there's room for improvement. True cost of service, this is huge. You want to be able to say, oh, it costs this much for this product to go out. And allocating costs correctly really gives you those insights. And then improved forecasting. How do you know what you're going to spend next quarter? Or if you're about to launch a new product, how do you even guess what that's going to cost on AWS? The key questions that you need to ask your leadership and your organization is, how is your business organized? So do you have teams that are all developers, all QA, all product? Or do you have a team per a product? How is this organized? And how does that work from a budgeting standpoint? What drives your cost? So is it more and more subscribers to your service? Is it when the sales team sells more? Is it a weather event that might drive up cost? What is that underlying influence on your cost? And then who are your customers? Are you business? Maybe some of your customers are internal, or maybe it's the everyday person. You want to make sure that you're defining that and that you're documenting that because you want people to be able to reference it. So when you're going through these, let's go a little bit more granular. So what do you need to consider, right? So when we're talking about your organization and how your teams are organized, what about granularity? So if you've defined teams and you know that you want to allocate based off of that, what granularity within that team do you want? And what will work? You don't want to be so granular that the data doesn't mean as much, but you also don't want to be so broad that, again, it doesn't mean as much or it's not as impactful. Shared cost. This is so important. Who's going to carry those shared costs? Things like your support charge or something that is used across the organization. Is that going to be carried by the central IT unit? Is it going to be distributed by percentage to each group? Or is there a top 3 accounts or something that you are going to distribute that based off of? Reserved instances and savings plans. So if you purchase this and you have an upfront fee, are you going to distribute that upfront fee to anyone who uses it? Are you going to assume that people have equal benefit to it? Are you going to distribute unused capacity that maybe you didn't get the full savings for? These are things that need to be decided by on all different levels of leadership before really defining that allocation. And then, of course, accountability. Who is going to keep up with the hygiene of this? And what is the mechanism you're using for accountability? Do you send out weekly emails? Is there a common source of billing data that people are looking at so they know where they stand? If you don't define this mechanism, then allocating costs isn't going to mean much because people are going to be looking at different things all over the place. So some examples that I've witnessed in defining allocation structure. So in this step, one is a large media company that I worked with that allocated their costs per subscriber. So they wanted to know, no matter what the product, what each subscriber to that cost. Another example is an automotive company that we worked with in Europe that allocates their cost based on the per car data requested. So each car had data that it was sending, and they wanted to know what is the cost of that car to send that data for while we're allocating these costs. Now we're going to go through implementing cost allocation. So you just went through all the core questions of defining cost allocation and what you need to pay attention to and what you need to document to make sure that you can actually start implementing. So for implementing, you're going to have tools and controls. So tools for actually doing the implementing, and then how do you make sure people are doing the implementing? Some of the AWS native solutions that we would use for this are the AWS Billing and Cost CSV, Cost Explorer, Cost and Usage Report, which you can then push into like Athena or Redshift. And then, of course, we have some amazing partner solutions in the AWS marketplace. So good intentions don't work, but mechanisms do. So it's great that you want to implement it, but now we really need to get into those mechanisms to make sure that you're keeping up that hygiene. So start allocating our cost. What mechanisms are we going to use and how are we going to enforce those? So first off, account naming. You want consistent account names across the board. And you, of course, want to make sure you're documenting that it makes sense to those answers of the questions that we had in the first section. And then you can enforce it by AWS organizations. So if you have people create their AWS accounts through organizations, you can have it set up to where the naming is going to be consistent. And a good example of this is you always want to have in there is it a production environment or a non-production environment? Do you want to put the product name in there? Or do you want to say which organization or business unit it is? Make sure you're defining that, and then you can enforce that by using AWS organizations. Resource tagging is going to take it one step further than the account name. So within that account, where are you getting the granularity? And you can enforce this through tag policies. And then grouping resources will help you kind of bring that all together in the end, and that will be through AWS cost categories. So tag policies, let's dig a little bit further in here. So you can manage them in organizations, and you want to define the valid values for tags. You don't want to do too many because that can overcomplicate and people won't keep it as hygienic, but you want to make sure you define what's important. And you want to determine the tag capitalization. So say you want to put in production, make sure it is either capitalized or lowercase, or make sure you're keeping track of those gotchas and keeping it consistent. And then this will also give you the opportunity to see what's non-compliant and bulk update those resources. So once you have the tag policy set up, you then navigate to the dashboard, which you have some screenshots of over here. And it will list all the resources currently not compliant with your rules. And then you can submit that bulk update to switch them to the correct values. And make sure that you are mandating this in a way that makes it easy for people to implement. You want to make sure that these tags are things that are not going to change all the time. If it's going to change on a weekly basis, it's not something you want to make mandatory. So you need to make sure that you have tag education and enforcement. And to do this, you can do it through service control policies, which allows you to define exactly what tags should be on your infrastructure, as well as what is allowed if the tag is not defined. So for example, and here are some examples of the policies over here, you can restrict new EC2 instances to not be created unless they have a cost center tag. And there's different levels you can do. You can maybe say, okay, I'm warn this person if it's created without a tag, or just don't let it be created. And that allows you to kind of monitor and keep things hygienic from the start, like when people start building it. It also can be used not just for mandating those tags, but to restrict services or particular instances from being used too. So if you want everyone to use C5s, or if you want a certain service not to be used, you can restrict it that way. One customer that I've worked with has implemented an alert when their budget reaches 200% of its target to restrict down their AWS environment to stop anything from being run or deployed through service control policies. And this is just an example. There's a lot you can do, but if you're going to enforce certain tag values, you need to make sure you have set things up like tag policies and service control policies to make it easier on your teams to keep up with. Next, AWS cost categories. So cost categories are a great way to group tags together. For example, you might have 4 applications which together form one of the services you offer. You can use cost categories to group these 4 tags together to charge back your service rather than having to set up and maintain a separate tag, which is huge. It helps you so much with keeping that granularity and not making it so granular that you don't understand the mapping. You can use different grouped accounts, services, and charge types together. For example, you want to segregate your usage spend versus credits or refunds. Or you have an account for each environment, so production, sandbox, non-production, and you want to group them together to see their total application cost. You can use something like AWS cost categories. Well, let me refresh a little bit on all those tips that I just told you. We want to be granular, but we don't want to be too granular. You want to make sure that you're getting the right level of detail so that you can find your true cost of service, but you don't want to be so granular that people have to add 15 plus tags and things are getting shut down and it's complex. You want to put in place the right mechanisms, like we listed before, to help reduce the overhead, make it easy on your teams to stay compliant. Show the importance of allocation hygiene. Show that you reward teams being hygienic and teams following these policies. Make sure that you don't just call out who didn't do it, but you call out who is doing it to reward that. And report back to stakeholders. If you're going to go through putting in all these mechanisms and making sure things stay consistent, make sure you're using that data and that information to report back to your stakeholders. So let's go through some examples of allocating costs in these ways. So here we have kind of that management account, so that overall account, which gives you one bill, easy tracking, combined usage. Under that, you're going to have AWS organizations. And through that, you have your linked accounts. So in your linked accounts, say you have B2B products and an internal tooling in organizations. Under that, you have your linked accounts of product B, production, product B, development, and then HR system production, dashboard, sandbox, and just making these names up just to kind of give some examples. Then you take it that next step further with the tagging. And 3 tags that I see a lot of people use and have a lot of success with are things like project, So what version of it is it? What project is kind of on the timeline right now so that you can see those phases. Cost center, which would usually map back to what you're using to track your costs internally, even outside of cloud cost. And the schedule. I always tell people to put a schedule tag in, even if you're not using something like an instance scheduler, because it allows you to have a quick look at when your resources need to be on. So when I say schedule, you could say 24/7, weekdays, 9 to 5, or maybe just on testing days, and you have those defined. And if a developer is thinking when they spin up an instance, okay, I need to know I need to tag this with a schedule from the start, then it starts helping people think about we don't have to have all of our resources on all the time. And it instantly puts in that optimization and efficiency mindset. So right here in this example, you now know each product because you have put it in organizations. Under each product, you know what phase it is, you know if it's an environment that is under production or non-production, you know if it is a certain version of that. So you could do, if you're retiring version 1, you can go through and see what all falls under that. You're able to bill it back because you have the cost center. And then you're also able to see, are these resources that are being used all the time? Or are these resources that can be turned on and off? And usually in a development or sandbox account, you're going to get a little bit away from that 24/7 mindset, which can help you save cost. So once all of this is implemented, now you have to report it back. And you have to report it back to not only stakeholders, but to anyone who can impact these allocations. Through this, we're going to again talk about some of the tools and controls. So when we talk about controls from a cost allocation standpoint, we've definitely gone through some different mechanisms that can help with those controls. But the biggest, most important control is going to be documentation. You want to make sure that someone can reference the logic behind your cost allocation. And whether that is internal pages that the company-wide can see or a document that anyone has access to, you want to know, people need to know the logic behind why am I going through this, right? Why are we putting these mechanisms in place? On reporting back allocations, one of my favorite ways to dig into it is through this cost intelligence dashboard. Now, there is a lab around setting up this cost intelligence dashboard, and we'll link to it at the end. But this sits in QuickSight, and it reads off of your cost and usage report. It is super low cost, easy to enable, and accessible to whoever you open it up to in your organization. So it's interactive, customizable, and really it has taught a lot of people about some of the core aspects of our cost and usage reporting. So it's a good exercise in general to get those insights into, okay, what does this mean when it's reported back? You can also customize it to where Team A goes in and sees their 10 accounts, or Team B goes in and see the 3 that they're responsible for. So it helps get an overall view for those teams instead of having to log in one by one to see what their costs are. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of some of the features of the Cost Intelligence Dashboard. And again, this just sits in QuickSight. And so you have different views. Right here, we're looking at usage cost summary. And you're able to drill down and actually see the benefit of those cost allocation strategies that you put into place. So if you see here, I'm drilling down on the different service. I can click these arrows to go up or down in my drill down, which can be really impactful. There's a lot of information on this page. Teams can kind of find what is important to them, but it gives you a consistent data source that everyone is seeing. So if I go over to the reserved instance and savings plan summary on this tab, I can see a view, an overall view, or I can drill down into advertising and see exactly what their savings summary is, allowing the teams to see their detail, but allowing stakeholders and leadership to see that overall view of, okay, real quick, what am I saving? What savings do I have that are opportunity? As you can see, I'm just drilling down through different details. So, from grouping to actual type of RI savings plan, and giving us that granularity that we might not have had before. Something like the cost intelligence dashboard is even more impactful when you've implemented that cost allocation strategy. It gives you so much more detail. You can see the tags, you can see the accounts, and you can see all those mechanisms that you worked hard to implement in the second section, but in real time, and not just a random report that comes to you once a month. So how this works is it's basically taking your AWS Cost and Usage Report, which sits in S3, and it's using Glue to put it through Athena and then into Amazon QuickSight. And QuickSight is where then you can kind of allow people access to the different views and allow them to either customize it or just view it or report it out or have it emailed to them, whatever they prefer. Some other examples that I've seen people do, even outside of the QuickSight dashboard and cost intelligence dashboard, is using that cost and usage report with Athena and Lambda to automate chargeback reports. So had a customer here who had kind of a consulting view of, we need to tell our internal customers what they're spending. And every week it would go through, they would had it set up in Amazon Athena to allocate those costs and use those mechanisms like tagging and account names and organizations to find out where the cost went. And then it automatically sent out the chargeback report, so kind of like their own bill. This customer actually used this on top of the cost intelligence dashboard, because then that person gets their bill or their chargeback report and can go into the cost intelligence dashboard or can go into Cost Explorer and see the data behind that, right? Understand what is driving that, which is so important. So going back to what we talked about at the front, visibility, accountability, motivation, true cost of service, and forecasting. So as you've seen as we've walked through this, we're giving insights into all these 5 categories. And then we also have another reInvent session coming up to dive even more into that forecasting mod. Coming to our original example with the media customer I worked with in the automotive with reporting back allocation. So the media company used something similar to the cost intelligence dashboard on their own internal systems to really give each team an insight into what to set their budget at. So once they knew how to budget and what was driving the cost of the budget, they were able to, from the top, find out those true cost per subscriber or per product, and the team was able to impact it and predict it more. And then in the automotive company, they were kind of billing out different reports and seeing what their teams would respond to more. And a lot of times their teams really just wanted that overview, okay, of what does this mean? And then the ability to drill down later if they wanted to. And each team had kind of their own way of digesting those costs, but it was a consistent way to show and give that visibility and then come back and be able to impact it. For visibility, we talked about that cost intelligence dashboard. Customize it for each user, for each team. On accountability, if you give the teams the right data, if you give them the data that leadership is seeing, they hold their budgets, they hold their plans, they're responsible for those, and they're able to make more efficient decisions. Motivation, similar to what I was talking about with the automotive company, they sent out kind of a monthly report that said, here is who did really well, like here's who optimized or brought down their unit cost or was able to budget correctly, and here is opportunity. And it's so important to highlight the wins on top of the opportunity. If we're only telling people you need to do A, B, and C, then they're going to be a little less motivated if it's not recognized when they do implement that. And then they're able to show that true cost of service, right? So the teams are in control of it. You're able to make better business decisions. They're motivated to highlight and win on those optimization finds. And in the end, the business is able to get a true cost of service to make even efficient and better products. So what is next? You can check out some of our cost allocation blog posts on the cost management blog on AWS. And then there's also our well-architected lab for the cost intelligence dashboard, which is what I walked you through a couple slides ago. And that will give you the templates to implement from the cost and usage report in your own environment. Strongly recommend, if you're interested in cost and usage data or interested in finding out where you stand right now from cost allocation and what insights you can get, to walking through the Cost Intelligence Dashboard Lab. It teaches you a lot about how costs are reported and the amazing level of detail that that cost and usage report gives you, but makes it digestible so you actually can use it. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you have a great reInvent.